You may have seen Dana White talking about his 86-hour fast recently. There's a lot of merit to what he did. Now, I know it's raising a lot of questions around the internet, but what I want to do in this video is I want to discuss what he did specifically in this 86-hour fast and what you can do to sort of do the same effects, whether you're doing a longer term fast or even a shorter fast. What's interesting is Dana White learned from Gary Brecka, who is someone that is an expert in sort of biological age. He looks at all these different aging markers and whatnot. Anyhow, he suggested to Dana White that he do a 3-day fast versus a 7-day fast because he said that a lot of the benefits are similar. Now I want to jump in right here because that is a very true point. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of literature that starts to suggest that after a 36-hour fast, there's a pretty dramatic line of diminishing return. So what you have to look at for yourself is if you're going to do these longer fasts, what is the risk reward with potential muscle loss and the benefits of the fast, right? So with an 86-hour fast, you're looking beyond 3 days. That might be a little bit aggressive for people that don't have maybe extra body fat on hand. So just put that into consideration.
Saw this thing online with this doctor from Boston. He was saying, and there's clinical studies, they've done studies on this thing, they've done it on animals and humans, that if you do this water fast for 7 days, basically when you put your body through adversity, right? Different types of adversity, like cold plunging, for instance. You stay in there for 3 minutes at 50 degrees, your body thinks you're dying and your liver releases that shock protein, right? Which is really good for you. When you do this water fast, your body starts fighting to try to stay alive when you do stuff like this to it. So apparently it sheds all the bad dead cells and regenerates all these new cells to fight starvation or whatever the body thinks is happening. How does that not make sense?
Now, Dana makes some claims about the body thinking it's quote unquote dying and whatnot. Yeah, that might be a little bit of an exaggeration. I don't think the body thinks it's dying per se, but he's trying to illustrate a point, okay? And that point is still valid. When the body goes into the stress response, similar to if you jump in ice cold water, there's going to be a release of catecholamines, which are going to stimulate more lipolysis, possibly fatty acid oxidation, depending on the deficit that you're in. The point is that by going a longer period of time without food, Dana experienced a number of things where the body starts to sort of break down fat tissue, potentially breaks down muscle tissue, goes through potential autophagy where it starts recycling organelles and components of cells. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But there's some other things that he mentioned that you absolutely cannot take away from the guy, no matter where you stand. He talks about how a couple days into the fast, he was thinking about food all the time, even though he wasn't hungry, which sort of tells us this big issue. This elephant in the room, so to speak. We have food on our mind, even when we're not physiologically being tempted to eat. And that is something we'll cover a little bit more here too. Now in the next little clip, he talks about his fasting protocol. We'll cut to a couple little clips of it from Saturday to Wednesday. He talks about what he did, but I'll also outline it here. Take a look at this quick clip and then I'll give a breakdown.
So when I left the event on Saturday night, I started fasting. And here's a picture of me Saturday night when I left. I just got done this morning, so Saturday to Wednesday, and here are the pictures of me this morning. So the first 24 hours, all you drink is water, but you can put electrolytes in your water. This is what I use. I'm sure you could use any electrolytes you want, but make sure that there's 0, 0, 0, 0 sugar, 0 carbs, 0 calories.
So the first 24 hours of the fast, he did water only, along with some 0-calorie electrolytes. This is exactly what I would recommend as well. If you're doing a 3-day fast, if you're doing a 7-day fast, you might want to creep in some of the coffee, some of the tea, things like that. But day one, if you can, just go straight water and maybe some electrolytes, you're in a really good spot. I think that's a great plan. As a matter of fact, a 24-hour fast, personally, I find to be the sweet spot. I find that a 24-hour fast done periodically is really what most people need if they're looking for the benefits of a fast. It's not always necessary to go super long. Again, you have to balance out that muscle wasting aspect as well. A 24-hour fast, you're gonna have much less because you allow yourself enough time to compensate that protein, compensate those calories, whereas a 3-day fast, you might start tipping into uncharted territory and break down a little too much. Anyhow, moving on.
Then the next day, this is the cleanest broth that you can buy. This thing only has 45 calories, less than 1 gram of carbs, and it has like 13 grams of protein. So all it really has is protein and 45 calories. That is the cleanest broth out available. Chefs will tell you that. It's Gary Brecka approved. You can pick this up anywhere. You do this twice a day for the next 2 days. You drink all your water with electrolytes, but you can do the broth twice a day. Bone broth, the bone broth, twice a day for the next 2 days.
The next couple of days, what he does is he adds in bone broth. So he suggests that bone broth twice per day is okay after day 1. And I would tend to agree. However, we do have to realize that bone broth is still going to break a fast. There's calories in it, there's protein in it, there's gelatin in it. But it does make it so that you're a little more satisfied, but it also provides you with a little bit of sustenance, so you feel like you're able to get through the day a little bit more. Not to mention it's so low calorie that the benefits of the fast are probably going to be larger than any negative attribute of having a couple of calories. Dana specifically mentions that he uses Kettle Fire. He says that that is Gary Brecka approved, and that's the one that he uses, which similarly, that's the one that I use and the one that I recommend. I went ahead and put a link down below for my link if you want to try Kettle Fire. It is good to put in to your fasts now and then. I also recommend you fast without it now and then, because I don't want people to only do a bone broth fast, but I think if you start going longer, adding a little bit of collagen, a little bit of that gelatin from bone broth could be good for the gut as well. So again, I put that link down below. So then he starts to discuss something called autophagy. Now, autophagy is a very, very nuanced subject. Autophagy is always happening inside of our body. But unfortunately, the way some of these clips have been pulled, it makes it sound like autophagy is something that only occurs when we're fasting. That's not the case. It's certainly accelerated when we're fasting. It is a cellular sort of, I don't know, I guess you could call it recycling, but it's just where the body starts to use unused components of cells for fuel because there's no food on hand. But autophagy will also increase when you're exercising. As a matter of fact, if you're training at 50 to 60% of your VO2 max for 60 minutes, you can increase autophagy as much as a 2 to 3 day fast. Here's a little clip from Dr. Tommy Wood and I. Dr. Tommy Wood is an expert in this world, and we talked about it. He mentions how autophagy is amazing. It definitely occurs with fasting, but exercise can induce it too.
But when you look at the applied literature in humans, 60-minute bout of low-level intensity aerobic exercise, like 50 to 60% of VO2 max, upregulates autophagy as much as a 72-hour fast. And they've even done studies where they have people fast for 36 hours before they do exercise, or they have them continuously fed during exercise. They give them a glucose infusion during exercise, and that fasting period before the exercise doesn't increase the autophagy response to exercise. It's all driven by the exercise itself.
But that being said, autophagy is something that would probably drive up more during a fast. It is simply deficit related in many ways. Exercise induces autophagy because you're putting yourself in an exercise-induced deficit. Caloric restriction puts yourself in a caloric restriction-induced deficit, and fasting puts yourself in an extreme caloric deficit, which is putting you at a more caloric deficit-induced autophagy. So he's not wrong there. I just don't want people to think that it's this magical thing that recycles all of your cells within your body. It's really nuanced, and it happens in different ways. The other thing that he talks about, which is absolutely valid, is the aspect of hormesis. Now, if you look at Gary Brecka is always talking about hormesis. It's really his claim to fame, at least as far as Instagram clips are concerned. But fasting is a hormetic stressor. It's exactly why I don't do it too much anymore, right? So in a lot of ways, doing a 1 to 3 day fast periodically might actually be a better stressor than, say, doing a 24-hour fast twice a week, right? If you have the extra fuel, i.e. body fat, on hand, you could probably get away with it, but it's still a stressor, and too much of a stressor is problematic, right? So the occasional fast is like a big stressor that you can recover from, because you're really only doing a 3-day fast, maybe every 4 to 6 months, something like that. That's what I would at least recommend. Now, there was a study that was published in JAMA, that took a look at caloric restriction, took a look at exercise, took a look at exercise plus caloric restriction, took a look at very high caloric restriction, or very low caloric restriction, I guess, along with exercise, a number of other different things. What they found is that every single category, whether exercise or caloric restriction, increased or improved oxidative stress. Okay, so it temporarily increased oxidative stress and then subsequently improved it as a stress response. So simply being in a caloric deficit actually improved oxidative stress, but the more the deficit, the more the improvement. But I'm sure there is a line of diminishing return once again. If you were to fast for 7 days and stress your body out, you might increase oxidative stress. Very similarly to how being on a ketogenic diet can actually increase oxidative stress temporarily, being somewhat problematic, and then the body kind of recovers. Because fasting is really, really paralleling a ketogenic diet as far as systems and processes are concerned within the body. So Dana is 100% spot on when it comes down to the hormetic side of things. But that's exactly where you need to have nuance and balance and restraint and not take it too far, because too much stress is, well, too much stress.
So the urges are this. When you start getting into like 48 hours, 50 hours, you're not hungry.
Okay.
But you're thinking about food. When you think about our life, everywhere we look and everything we do, turn on the TV and try to watch a football game. It's pizza and, fast food restaurants and all this that's just beating you over the head subliminally. And then you start walking around your house and you look at that you got in your house and you're not hungry. You're bored and you're walking around snacking. And
then Dana talks about food in abundance. I want to circle back to this, because this is something that I've seen people pick apart online, and I don't think it's fair to pick it apart because it's real. We do have a crisis of abundance, as Dr. Peter Attia had said. Peter Attia came on my channel and he talked about this. Here's a quick little clip when he talks about the crisis of abundance. We have so much food. Just check this out.
Lo and behold, we managed to arrive in the 20th century or the 19th century as the top of the food chain, and everything was kind of hunky-dory. And then something changed, which is ironic in that these amazing minds of ours actually created so much technology that made it so easy for us to get this one thing that we were evolving to make sure we never went without, which is, food, movement, all of these other things. So now we have this crisis of abundance, right? And by now, I mean called directionally the past 120 years, 100 years even. And as you pointed out, that's not enough time for evolution to catch up. So if we were Darwin, holding, be able to manipulate the system, of course we would come up with a way to get rid of this feature now. If you think about it, you and I don't need to go a day, don't need protection from a day without food, because we'll never go it without choosing it. So we could very easily tweak the system, tweak the mitochondria to be way less efficient, tweak the body to be more thermogenic, to dispose of excess energy through heat production, through heat generation or otherwise. Thermogenesis through shivering, anything we could have done to have gotten rid of excess energy. And that would be an adequate solution, but it might take another 10,000 years for our bodies to figure that out. Furthermore, there isn't a great pressure for the body to do that, because our excess is not impairing our reproduction. So most people are still reproducing at an age that is not impaired by our energy excess. The excess energy that we have is only creating chronic disease, not acute disease.
What's interesting is Dana mentions, that his body wasn't hungry, but his head sort of was, which illustrates that we have this psychological sort of need for food, even if our body isn't really craving it, because a lot of what's happening is cerebral at this point. I mentioned this in a video where I talked about the 1970s diet compared to today. There is a 23% increase in the average caloric intake from 1,900 calories in the 1970s to about 2,400 to 2,500 calories today. We eat more because we're exposed to more, and it's available. And by occasionally fasting, you abstain from that, and you do sort of connect again. You say, wait a minute, maybe I don't need that food. Maybe you get a little bit more in touch with what's actually needed versus what you want. Now I want to get into the good stuff though. I want to break down how you can modify this to do it for you. Because sometimes a 3 or 3.5 day fast is daunting looking. I've done them, they're fun, they feel good, you do get some benefit, but I also have talked to hundreds of people that just don't want to take that leap, and I totally understand that. And remember, Gary Brecka came at Dana with this, with a different angle. He wasn't just talking about it from body composition. He took a look at Dana's biological age, probably using some form of epigenetic aging system or aging.ai, where they're kind of plugging their blood chemistry in to determine biological age. Remember that biological age does not mean that you're actually that age. It is one metabolic piece of the puzzle. Okay, so biological age means, okay, I'm 50 years old inside, but I'm actually 65 years old in real life. That just means that you're metabolically healthier. It doesn't mean that you're going to die at a certain time. It could parallel that as far as metabolic concern, but there's other things too. There's cardiovascular, there's all these other different things. Point is, it matters, but it's not the end of the world. But that's why Dana did these fasts, to improve his metabolic health. So let's look at what you could do. Bottom line is, most of the literature suggests you'll end up making up the calories in the future. So if you fast for 3 days, over the next couple of months, you'll probably end up slowly increasing calories to compensate. The body is really good at finding that homeostasis. So the nice thing about doing 3-day fasts is you allow yourself a gradual time to compensate. You're probably not going to eat a bunch of food in the following 3 or 4 days and compensate for 3 days worth of not eating, but you might over the course of a month or two. What we have to remember, first and foremost, is that muscle preservation is key. Okay, so if you're going to do a longer term fast, I don't really recommend you do large amounts of cardio. I recommend during your longer fast, you resistance train. Resistance training is going to remind your muscles via a different pathway that you need to maintain your muscle. Stimulus is the biggest driver of muscle growth and muscle preservation. So doing cardio could be good, but it also could cause you to atrophy. So if you're going to do a 2 to 3 day fast, resistance train. Put the tension on all your muscles. Resistance train in a full body fashion. It's one of the best things that you could do. And post fast, this is new literature that came out in December of 2023, published in Cell Reports. Load up on protein that first meal. You can have 100 grams of protein and your body will likely utilize it as long as it's not like 100 grams of a fast absorbing protein. So what I would recommend is prior to breaking your fast, doing some resistance training so that you're increasing muscle protein synthesis and the need for protein. And then upon finishing that resistance training workout, then break your fast with literally 50 to 100 grams of protein. But what I do in this particular case, based upon the new literature that suggests we can consume large amounts of protein in one sitting, is I'll do maybe 25, 30 grams of whey and do the rest with either chicken or beef. That way I have a fast digesting and a slow digesting. Because I don't want to get into nuance of that study, but basically the only thing that changes, you're not absorbing it rapidly. They've found using tracers that you're just absorbing protein over a number of hours. But the important thing to do is to get that large bolus of protein in so that you can compensate for a lot of the protein that you may have missed. Again, I cannot drill that into your head more. The biggest thing that you need to pay attention to in doing these longer fasts is muscle preservation. Another thing that you may want to do, you could slightly shorten the length of that fast down to a 48-hour or even a 36-hour if you really wanted to. And what you would want to do is after breaking that fast, keep carbohydrates out of the equation for a couple of days. When you go into a fast, one of the main benefits, as you may already know, is the elevation of ketone bodies. Okay, these do a number of different things, but they are really what are making you feel good and giving you that energy that you have when you're fasting. If you break your fast and you load up on a bunch of carbohydrates, there's nothing really wrong with that, but you do stop the fast in its tracks. If you were to just eat meat and maybe fat, protein and fat for maybe another day or two, you would actually be able to continue a lot of the positive effects of the fast. Sure, you may not be in a caloric deficit, but you're at least keeping your blood sugar levels stabilized and you're keeping ketone bodies high, which might have an effect on how you feel. In fact, it might carry on some of the benefits of that fast despite actually eating. If you really want to continue it, do 24, 48, heck, 72 hours, and then go on for 24, maybe 48 hours of relatively lower calorie, low carb. So maybe just some protein. So that way you're doing sort of a protein sparing modified fast where you're stopping muscle breakdown, but you're still elevating ketones and you're still getting the benefits of a fast continuing on. It's sort of a shortcut and kind of a hack to get more out of the fast without just quote unquote starving yourself. Now, all of this stuff combined can have huge effects, but how frequently should you do it? I think doing a 3-day fast, again, might be extreme for a lot of people. If you do that, 1 every 4 to 6 months is probably all you really need to feel the benefits. But I would much more prefer that you do like a 24 or 36 hour fast, maybe once a month, or maybe a little more frequently than that, followed by a low carb protocol for a day or two after. That way you're not going into such a severe deficit. Granted, if you're very overweight, you can probably get away with the longer fast. It's just important that we note that this is not magic. Our bodies are perfectly capable of adapting to these kinds of stressors. And if you fast too much, you're going to adapt to that as well. You want fasting to remain the anomaly so that the benefits are still there. It's like the tolerance to alcohol or to something else, right? The first time you take it, you're like, whoa. But if you started doing it over and over again, eventually it loses the effect. The body adapts quickly. Fasting should be a little bit of a shock, let it do its effect, and then go back to a modified normal. Maybe not your normal habits if they're not healthy, but a modified normal. Let it be the catalyst for you to change your life, but don't let it be the norm. I'll see you tomorrow.